Of course, a very important date that we have. And I suppose it's a reflection on what happened on that tragic date, that where we are at the moment, how we cope with it, what have been the consequences of what happened then, and whether we made any headway forward or not. I think there's been a lot of issues in relation to what happened on 9/11, which really are still with us in this day, today, and perhaps in the foreseeable future as well. I think sometimes when we do these sort of acts that happen, they define history not for a generation, for generations to come. And I think we seriously, particularly us in the West, have got to look at how we deal with these issues, what are the consequences of these issues, and what are the implications at the end. I think it was Winston Churchill who said of the Americans that they will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all of their options. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that we're at a stage now where we continuously walking from one particular issue to another one without understanding the consequences of where we're at. I think it was quite important that when the vote recently on Syria took place, certainly my view was that we should have learned from the last decade of what had gone on, and to go into more ventures of this nature were not good for us to carry on with those sort of ventures, but to understand the implications. We in the United Kingdom have always been regarded as people who understand, particularly our Foreign Office, who has been credited with a huge amount of understanding of what happens and how we deal with cultural issues, religious issues around the world. But unfortunately, sometimes when we politicians don't take their advice, we also end up in the same position. And it's important for us to realize that. So I think there are very, very significant issues. We need to look at some of our friends and partners that we deal with, particularly in the Muslim world, and the consequences that arise from them. Look at the way different people look to settle their own scores within using the remit of the international community, NATO, the US and the UK and the European Union, and what are the consequences of that. I think that is a huge issue that we need to look at and need to see how we move forward. I think it's about time that we challenged some of the ways of doing things and the way that we have done things, because the consequences of that, as we see for more than the last decade, are not really good, and I don't see for the foreseeable being any better. You know, there was a huge issue of looking at the Arab Spring. But before that, in 2002, I believe, the British Council produced some literature on this real principle, actually, of so-called democracy in the Arab world. And I was called to that, and I went to that meeting, and I said, look, what is democracy? And unless we understand what democracy is, to impose our system on people that are there who don't really understand the rules behind what we call democracy, then it's not worth doing it. If you don't understand the issue of transparency, if you don't understand the issue of accountability, if you don't understand the structure, if you don't understand the rule of law that you're supposed to be operating, if those are in the behest of a particular family, which alleges itself to be a political entity, a particular organization which is held by a particular key individual or family individuals around them, but just the pure act of having an election doesn't mean it becomes a democracy. So I think there are real significant issues as how to move forward and how to look at some of these issues for the future. I'm sorry I'm taking probably a bit longer. Unfortunately also, I want to get up the motorway as soon as I finish because I've got issues in Birmingham to deal with as well. And so hopefully my people won't take too long in getting there, and hopefully we won't break the speed regulations in doing that. The speakers today are Sandra, who is a very long-standing friend of me and the Third World Solidarity, and who's done actually a huge amount of work in relation to that, and credit to her. Of course, Mr. Mustaq Bashari, who cracks the whip at all of us in these times. But also, I think, really understanding over the last decade the commitment that he's had, bringing these sort of issues forward has to be recognised. And it's important that we do that, for people like him to do that. Mr. Dawar Qureshi MBE has become a very good friend over recent years because of his own commitment to looking at issues of not just education, which he does very well, but also looking at the issue of radicalisation and looking at something that we're talking about at the moment, how we de-radicalise some people, and the work that he's done in the past across not just the UK but across Europe, and of course his forthright views in Asia, and particularly in Pakistan, which is perhaps made him as popular as I am. I think that we have Mr. Kamal Alam at the back, which I haven't met, and I'm wondering why I haven't met him.
There, yes.
So far.
Young man.
Sorry, there he is, Kamal Alam. I haven't met him so far, and I think somebody's going to rate that and make sure that's put right very soon. And there's Sabah Al-Mukhtar.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you very much for coming here today.
Stephen.
I haven't forgotten and Mr. Stephen O'Brien, who I actually look forward to meeting. I think we need to have a discussion about some of the work that he does in the London Magazine and see how we can sort of try and develop some of those issues. So I think a very, very good list, and unfortunately I won't be here, and I'm glad to see that there are some recording devices here which will allow me to have some more feedback on that and see how it goes. So I'm sure you will have a very good evening, a very good discussion, and I look forward to getting a report back on that. So Mr. Bashari, thank you very much, and I'll leave you in charge. Thank you.
Can you sit for 5 minutes at least? And then you can give an interview, not later on after I've spoken at least. I know the speaker is important, but they want to have your interview, and I don't want them to leave before I say something. And I know at the end, I'll tell you why. In the beginning, I wanted to invite only about 20 people, the experts who are sitting on the top table, as Khalid has mentioned, to speak about 9/11. Last year we held a meeting in Boothrai Room, which holds about 120 people, and there were more than 200 people, and there were queue outside. So I didn't want to make it public every year, because I have been doing it for past 12 years, and many of you have attended those meetings. But this year I wanted to see how can we move forward. And thank you very much, Khalid Mahmood Sahab, who is, I know in Birmingham there are issues, but I wanted him to chair this meeting because he's not only vice chairman and office bearer of all party parliamentary groups on Third World Solidarity, but he is the chairman of counter-terrorism and international relation, NBBGs. So he is very actively involved in counter, and I'm very pleased that our vice chairman, Lord Qurban Hussain of Luton, has also joined us, and he's known a supporter of Third World Solidarity for many years. But I just wanted to take only a few minutes of you, and then we will have a debate actually, even today, although the number is increased, and I know some of you, and James is sitting here who has written a book on peace and what is the prospect of 9/11. There are Kifale Ahmed from Ethiopia, so there is a wide range, Shahryar from Iran, and wide range of people here. Professor and Mrs. Shani Tawfiq, I call him, and Mrs. Tawfiq is one. So it is an invitation, and very pleased that High Commissioner of Pakistan is represented. I wanted Acting High Commissioner to come and speak, but because speaker keep on increasing and my demand of attendance keep on increasing, I said somebody who can listen today, not speak, but in future they will speak. I think 9/11 didn't happen suddenly. There is a long history behind it. You will listen what the Middle East has got out of it, what Asia has got out of it from Kamal Alam, who has done a PhD from Durham University on Afghanistan issue. And he has lived in Syria, and he has lived in Germany, and he has done a lot of work on it, and he will speak for himself. Sabah al-Mukhtar, we were together when we were campaigning against sanction on Iraq. So it is a long time. I have brought some people together here. And I think it is a long history. I wouldn't go into it. You all know about it. But I think it is very important to remind that 9/11, there was none Pakistani in it, all were from a country where still the system is same, but all other Middle East is disturbed because of 9/11. Occupation of Iraq, Libya, Syria today, enmity against Iran, and then the most affected country on earth, which had nothing to do but became the victim of it, is Pakistan. More than 50,000 people have been killed in Pakistan, more than 5,000 soldiers have been killed in it, and it is still at the verge of a lot of difficulties which we should look at. But why it happened? Because I think the military governments, and then especially Ziaullah, allowed Pakistan, which is geographically very important in that part of the world, Pakistan to be used against Russia. And that is the reason that we are facing it today, even at this time of the day. And I think today's debate will be very important because, as Khalid Mahmood MP, as Honourable Member of Parliament has said, that there are media people, and I'm thankful. TV 786 is covering it all, and it will be on TV 786 either today or tomorrow. John Gio is here, and many others are here. Stephen O'Brien himself might write something in his magazine at some stage, and others as well. Mirza Khan is here from Potwa, so it will be well publicized, and that is very important. Although here there are 20, 25, 30 people, but it will be very widely circulated, and that's why it is very important. But I think one thing before I end and invite the speaker to speak about it is very important. Suddenly after 9/11, freedom fights have been suppressed, whether it is in Sri Lanka, whether it is in Chechnya, or in Kashmir, or in Palestine. And it has become a terrorism. So we have to look at that why freedom fights have changed into terrorist activities. Second thing which is very important is to look at it. In 2014, the independence movement have been very successful, whether it is Kosovo, East Timor. Why not in certain parts of the world? Even Sudan, has been divided into two, but not many outstanding long issues. And today there was a debate on Kashmir in Parliament. That has been left over. So I think it is very important that we look when in 2014 the forces from Afghanistan are withdrawing, UK and USA, they are aiming to go back in Iraq. Are they going to be safe that once they leave Afghanistan they don't go back, or they don't need to go back? I think these are the things which will be discussed today, and I'm very pleased that you are here. I hope we end the meeting by 8 o'clock. That's why I started a few minutes early, that Khalid can leave earlier, and I know Alana Cohen is here, who is going to take him to Birmingham, I hope, with other friends. But I'm very pleased that you are here. We will listen to all speakers. They are experts. But I will start with, I think, the young man. I think he will be very important to speak on this issue because he's very keen, Kamal Alam. And I didn't want him to speak on you because I didn't want to do this dice. I wanted a round table, but because the number increased, I've done it. So can I invite Kamal Alam, PhD? I think it is better if you speak from here. Come here, Kamal Alam.
Thank you, Mr. Lashari. So, I think at the moment Syria is in the news almost every day for the last 2-3 years. And although originally I told Mr. Lashari I would speak about Afghanistan, I thought I would probably begin with Syria for the first half and say a few words about Afghanistan. So, on 9/11, which is actually also the birthday of Bashar al-Assad, so today's the birthday of the Syrian president as well. It was very interesting when the two towers fell. The two countries that became the front line of the war was Syria and Pakistan. Pakistan, obviously, because Pakistan was right next to Afghanistan and was supporting the Afghan Taliban, so, and they had a large army on the Afghan border, so the Americans needed to work with Pakistan. Syria, why Syria? And this is something few people understand, I think, that Syria, Henry Kissinger said, to make war in the Middle East, you need Egypt. To make peace in the Middle East, you need Syria. And that's the first person George Bush called after September 11 was Henry Kissinger. Because, he's the man who's run American policy in the Middle East for the last 30, 35 years. And he called Henry Kissinger and said, you know, how do we engage with Syria? Because there was a young president in charge of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, and he was very different to his father. You know, he was educated in England, he wasn't meant to be the president, he was an ophthalmologist. You know, his brother died and he took over the presidency. He understood the West very well, and he obviously learned from his father. Now, Syria, conventionally speaking, you know, hadn't done too well in the wars against Israel. But one thing Syria excelled at was with diplomacy. All the presidents from Nixon to Carter to Reagan to Clinton said the most difficult person they had to deal with in their career was Hafez al-Assad. That's because Hafez al-Assad was a genius. It was very difficult for any Western leader to sit with Hafez al-Assad in the same room and come out with their demands intact. So more often than not, Hafez al-Assad used to get his demands met. And actually the best way of looking at it is, in Lebanon's 30-year civil war, Syria came out as the victors because Syria stabilized Lebanon. They were given a mandate by the United Nations and the Arab League to send in a Syrian army to Lebanon and bring the civil war to an end. And all the groups that were fighting in Lebanon, there were Shia groups, Sunni groups, Christian groups, they were all at one point under the control of the Syrian military and intelligence. When America invaded Iraq in 2003, you know, the Americans couldn't understand what was happening in Iraq because you had a Sunni insurgency and a Shia insurgency. The Sunni insurgency in Fallujah and Anbar both had a lot of roots in Syria, and also the Shia insurgency in Basra and the south was also being supported by Syria. So there you have the most complicated situation where the Sunnis and the Shias of Iraq were at one time both being supported by the Syrian military intelligence, and also Lebanon at all points, whether it was Mishal Aoun, the strongest Christian leader of Lebanon, or Hezbollah, the strong Shia group, were under the control of Assad. So now, the reason to understand this is, how on earth can you deal with Syria when Syria actually has their fingers in all neighboring countries who they've controlled so well? And Syria was a key player in the fight in the war on terror. Syria supported the Americans and the British intelligence in handing over terrorists to Guantanamo Bay. Bashar al-Assad was cooperating with the French, the Germans, the Brits. You know, he was welcomed back into international folds. And I think the biggest mistake that's been made in the last 3 years is to isolate the government of Bashar al-Assad. Because now we're seeing the fruits of that. We've seen terrorists in Iraq and Syria. You know, it was a legitimate uprising. People wanted change, but it was hijacked by terrorists very quickly. And to make it worse, the West has backed Gulf governments from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to support these guys. You know, whilst the country that supported the West on the war on terror most was Syria, Iran, and Pakistan. Iran is the main reason why Afghanistan and the Bonn conference happened, because if Iran didn't bring the Tajiks and the Hazaras together, there would be no Karzai, there would be no Afghan reconciliation. So Iran fully cooperated with the West for there to be an international force in Afghanistan and have a government there. Similarly in Iraq, because Iraq had launched a war on Iran, which was supported again by groups which had no right to go to war against Iran. At the same time, when Saddam was knocked over, Iran helped, you know, to bring. However, Iran was then ignored. No one worked with Iran, and there's been this quest to isolate Iran, and as a result, there's instability all over the region. And actually, if you look at Iran's borders, it's mostly got Sunnis there. You've got Baloch, you've got Kurds, you've got some Azaris. Yet there is no problems in Iran. You know, although there have been groups, terrorist groups, that have been supported even in this country to destabilize Iran, Iran has not been destabilized. So it has by and large lived peacefully with a lot of Sunnis in its own countries. And that's why I think it's very important now that we look at the world after 9/11. You know, things changed. Syria remains the key state. It's almost like 100 years ago when the Ottoman Empire fell, the only thing the Arabs wanted was Damascus. They didn't care about Jerusalem. You know, they said, okay, the Zionists can have Jerusalem. You know, they didn't care about even Makkah and Medina. The Hashemites only wanted Damascus. This is the most important capital, along with Baghdad, in the Arab world's history. So, but actually what happened in Damascus after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and shaped the modern Middle East, because King Faisal had then gone to Iraq, then Iraq changed. And, today again, if you look at the Arab Spring, it's turned into an Arab winter in Damascus. You toppled Gaddafi, it was easy. You got rid of Mubarak, it wasn't a problem. You got rid of Ben Ali in Tunisia, not a problem. Even Yemen wasn't the problem with Saleh. When it comes to Syria, everything that's been thrown at the government, they withstood. Because one of the things we hear about in the media, that this is an Alawite government, this is a minority ruling over a majority. But this is a very inaccurate picture painted by the media. And actually, the world's best expert, the Oxford professor Patrick Seal, who sadly passed away 2 months ago, Patrick Seal, throughout his years at Oxford, he's the world's top Syria expert before he died. No one in the British government listened to him. The Prime Minister called him for a briefing to explain what's going on in Syria. He said, look, you've got to work with him to solve this problem of terrorism, because he's been working with the West since September 11th. He has successfully eliminated a lot of groups that the West was scared about after September 11th. And actually now, after 3 years, when Bashar did say that, that there was a legitimate, and there's interviews on record, you can go to the interview where the Syrian president is saying, yes, we have faults, there are problems in Syria, but do not turn this into a regime change and into something that will breed terrorists. So that's what's happened in Syria, and I think at this moment in time, the consequences we see in Iraq is also directly related to the destabilization of Syria. Jordan is scared, Lebanon is very tense, because again, like I said, Lebanon has, for good or for bad, been controlled by Syria for 35 years. The joke is that if a crow falls over Lebanon, it's the Syrians who told it to fall down. So by destabilizing Syria, you destabilize Lebanon, you stabilize the Golan Heights, which are occupied territory, and Syria had kept the Golan Heights safe for 30 years. So yeah, the immense damage that's been caused to the region by the destabilization of Syria, which was a white still country in a war on terror, is huge. And I think the Labour government did re-engage with Bashar al-Assad. I remember David Miliband went, and I know Mr. Lashari was also instrumental in that trip, where the British knew that they had to reach out and work with Syria on all fronts. Again, quoting Kissinger, you can't have peace with the Palestinians if you don't talk to Damascus. And if Damascus shakes, then the region shakes. And this is the history of the region. When Salah ad-Din took Jerusalem, the first city he had to take was Damascus. Because even he knew, to take Jerusalem from the Crusaders, you first need Damascus. T.E. Lawrence knew, to remove the Ottoman Empire, you need Damascus. So there's a historical, geopolitical link to it. It's not necessarily linked, because obviously there was no Assad 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago. So it's the importance of Syria. The Syrian families, the big Sunni families, the big Christian families, the Druze families, these Alawite families, they're all fabric of Lebanon, Jordan, and what was called Bilad al-Sham, or the former Ottoman provinces of Aleppo, Damascus. And actually the former province of Aleppo that the Ottomans had more influence in territory than modern-day Syria, because the province of Syria looked over what is now Palestine and Israel. So that's why even if you analyze Israeli military literature, the Israelis have always been most paranoid about Syrian control over Palestinian groups. So yeah, I'd probably like to end there and say that one of the most, difficult moments in this time comes because of the isolation of Syria, and the most important thing to eliminate terrorists who work with governments. I mean, this, Houses of Parliament has a rich history of working with dictators, so I don't think there's anything wrong with working with another one. We work with Pinochet of Chile, Galtieri of Argentina, Suharto of Indonesia, the Saudis. So why not work with another one which will actually save British lives and the national interest of this country? All right.
Thank you very much, Kumar, and I'm pretty sure that after the discussion and this meeting, people will be very happy to talk to you, because I think you have a lot of knowledge and research done by you, and obviously the other speakers, when you listen, you will understand they are also as important as Kamal Alam. But I wanted to put a young man first, and Wasim Akhtar Sahab, thank you very much for coming. I think today there are very wide range of representation here, so I'm very pleased that you came. Can I invite Sandra Settley, who is a founder member of Third World Solidarity, a journalist and long-standing, as Khalid said, supporter of Third World Solidarity, to come and very briefly speak, and then my main two speakers.
Thank you. I shall be absolutely brief. In the first instance, I would like to say, post 9/11, Mushtaq Ashari and Third World Solidarity have had an annual meeting to look at the world after 9/11. Our meetings have ranged from youth wing to women to critical politics. We have had a number of speakers. Last year we had Rory Stewart, and prior to that, at the instigation of this annual meeting, we had people like Michael Portillo. We've had the right, the left, and the center well represented. I won't give you names, but this is a meeting of hope that we've had since 9/11. And I'd like to make a few comments off that, which are perhaps less hopeful in my own experience. And if I may go back to 2002, I interviewed Gore Vidal at the Financial Times, where I was a journalist then, 1 year on, to talk to him about post 9/11. And I began my introduction to the interview with the following words. Terrorist attacks on the United States, a war in Afghanistan, the US on the brink of invading Iraq, nuclear threats by Pakistan and India over Kashmir, and no resolution in sight to the bloodshed between Palestine and Israel. Not a good year. My first question was to ask Mr. Vidal what the UN and individual governments could do to create a less chaos-ridden 2003. His response, unsurprisingly, was not optimistic. What struck me at the time was that little had changed during the year following 9/11, with George Bush and his war on terrorism well documented, and his subsequent invasion of Afghanistan. Wind forward to 2014, 13 years post 9/11. And although some of the names, circumstances, and places may have changed, to my mind, we continue to live in a chaos-ridden world. Throughout the past 13 years, war, pillage, invasion, execution, famine, and natural disasters have continued to dominate the media headlines. Take the Islamic State. Obama and Cameron insist that President Assad does not have legitimacy, but Assad appears to have 14% of support by the people of Syria. Many Western, I say it as an aside, a Western leader has had and operated on less than that margin in the past. And Assad also has been, whatever one may say as a critique about him, he's been in the forefront of trying to curtail ISIS, i.e. the Islamic State, the Caliphate. The CIA provided weapons to anti-Assad groups that have ended up in ISI hands. This should be a surprise to no one. Last year, the Saudis were supporting these jihadis. And by the way, a former head of MI6 has drawn attention to the fact that Saudi financial support has proved, and I quote, critical to the rise of ISIS, end of quote. Today, the Saudis are meeting with a broad coalition of partners in Jeddah with the aim of stopping the ISI threat. Quote, "We won't get involved in another ground war," says President Obama. "No boots on the ground," end of quote. Journalist Daniel Pearl was beheaded in Pakistan, and 2 more Western journalists, I am a journalist by trade, met the same fate recently, as we all know, by ISIS. This is shocking. While Saudi Arabia sanctions beheading on an all too regular basis, where is the outcry? I interviewed some years ago the head of Amnesty International, who said that the 2 of the states that had the most lethal injections or beheading by the government of criminals, we were talking about, number 1, Saudi Arabia, and secondly, the US. We live in a state of chaos at the moment, I think, in terms of the global politics. It's astounding to me, really and truly, that we have events, beheadings that can be okay in some respects with no outcry, and beheadings in another respect that can be considered okay, because Saudi Arabia, of course, is a very wealthy nation, and the West, in my opinion, too often plays into their pockets because of their wealth. I wonder what lessons we've learned, and I'd like to return, just to end, to Gore Vidal in answer to my question about how the world could move on from chaos, and to reiterate his response is one of pessimism. And in my opinion, since 9/11, if you take Palestine, Kashmir, and on and on and on to ISIS, to the CIA, little has changed. I wonder what lessons we've truly learned. 13 years on, you tell me, could anyone here have imagined then what is going on today? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. As Kamal mentioned, we worked very closely with many British establishments, Home Office, Foreign Office, and I was successful in sending David Miliband to Syria, and the Syrian foreign minister came here, and they had a planned press conference in Foreign Office. And in the night, 2 o'clock, a US missile went into the Syria territory and killed about 10 people, and that press conference was cancelled. So sometimes even CIA and American Pentagon try to sabotage what Britain is trying to do as well. So it is a case, and then Mr. Salem became chief guest in the next room, Foreign Minister of Syria, in our meeting of Third World Solidarity, and he spoke that, look, we are facing sometimes sabotages from our own allies and friends. And I still remember the TV Fox was covering our event, and their question was directly related to them and objecting to the Bashar al-Assad's government. And I think in the international diplomacy, that doesn't work when you are directly attacking a government and you are trying to have a negotiation with them. We have seen that when there are economic interests, they go out of their way to mobilize it, and when there are other interests of selling weapons or testing the weapons, they will go exactly opposite way as long as they can. My next speaker, now I'm starting from the left, and then I will end up to the final point, is Taha Qureshi, MD, who has done a lot of work since 1999, even before 9/11, on interfaith and bringing extremist terrorism into the control. He worked with the mosques, he's worked with the colleges, he's done so much, that if I start introducing him, it will be the evening, whole evening. But I want to ask him to speak for not more than 10 minutes because he's done a very long paper. But I think to just warn you as well that be prepared, Ta Qureshi and me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lushari. Good evening, everyone. It isn't a long paper, it's a few slides, as a matter of fact. But I will try my best to finish it in 7 to 10 minutes. The topic for today was the war on terror, past, present, and future. I'll be concentrating more on the future, how we could make the future bright for our future generations. Nonetheless, Afghanistan has been, as a matter of fact, focal point for a long time. And let's just remind ourselves that how many groups were working in striving for control in Afghanistan. And in the late 1970s, the former Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan, and they lost almost 15,000 soldiers in this whole war. And then, of course, Afghanistan witnessed 3 stages of war. The first phase starting in late 70s, the second in the 90s, and then, of course, the one we are talking about, the third phase after 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. And then the 1979 attack on Afghanistan by the former Soviet Union. US, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia offered support to anti-communism Mujahideen. And this is a very difficult part for the Muslims in the entire history of that region. Everybody says now that Islam is a part of the problem, whereas to me, what I understand, that our research shows, that it was the international policy, and then Pakistan was asked to follow that policy, to invite the religion in this whole war of Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, and the anti-communism war to destroy or to disintegrate former Soviet Union. Hence, Pakistan's religion and the religious communities, the madrasas, the seminaries, they became part of that so-called solution, which is now part of the problem, as a matter of fact. It isn't the Islam, it isn't the madrasas, as a matter of fact. It was the state policy that influenced the religion, not the religion or the religious authorities influenced the state policy. And then after a lot of casualties and the disintegration of former Soviet Union, the Americans left Pakistan as well as the Afghan people in lurch without any infrastructures. All those Stinger missiles the Mujahideen was trained to use, but they were left there without any checks and balance. And we are all aware of that. Nonetheless, just to remind ourselves, and how did that happen? And I always quote what Hillary Clinton said in one of the statements she gave to Congress, that the Taliban were a result of US strategy of countering Soviets in Afghanistan. And if I start quoting her, we also have a history of a kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I'm bringing Pakistan in for a reason. I'll tell you that in the end. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we founded 20 years ago. That was only a few years ago when she said that, when she was the Secretary of State. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. And she continues. We then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine. You deal with these Stinger missiles that we have left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. This is what Hillary Clinton said. Just remember that. In fact, we are sanctioning you. So we stopped dealing with the Pakistani military and with ISI, and we now are making up for a lot of lost time. This is what she said. So my dear friends, this is something which we ought to remember. What is happened, and that is our past, where Pakistan is now on the receiving end. Pakistan is being presented as a country which is full of problems, and it is created by the Pakistani nation. So we, as far as we are concerned, what we deal with the young Muslims, young Pakistanis in this country or that, we need to support them even more now what we used to do in the past. And the narratives, of course. When Osama bin Laden, we didn't send Osama bin Laden there. When Osama bin Laden was taken there, he fought with the Soviets. What was Western media saying about him? Independent. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. This is for Osama bin Laden. This is for Osama bin Laden, our newspaper saying. And we see many U-turns. What we saw in Pakistan and Afghanistan by the Americans, we have seen all over again. And let's see what CNN is saying now. US and Iran from sworn enemies to partners on Iraq. It's a big U-turn. The axis of evil was called by the media. Now they are becoming partners. It's made as Shia and Sunni war. It wasn't a Shia and Sunni war. This Afghan war, as a matter of fact, which was imposed on us, it's been made in Pakistan as Shia Sunni war as well. It's been transformed into a different menace now, as we've taken into Libya, into Iraq, into Afghanistan, into Syria now. So we ought to be very careful. Then on the other hand, it is said, Obama administration suggests US may join with Iran to stop ISIS in Iraq, as UN says, group likely committed war crimes. Well, I wonder who supported all these people. Where did they get this money and ammunition from? Not Pakistanis or Islamic leaders from the United Kingdom went there and supported them. I remember our foreign secretary calling these freedom fighters, the opposition parties, as the fighting for a noble cause to topple Assad's regime. When the presidents, the prime minister, the foreign secretaries are supporting this war against maybe legitimate or illegitimate government, but there is a government, there is a control, law and order there. When we are supporting them, the young people watching that video would say this is a noble cause, let's go to Syria. So now it is not 500 like our agencies are saying, it's a lot more than 500, I'm afraid. I'm saying this because of my experience, and I'll come to that shortly. How much, if we ask ourselves, have we really won this war? Are we winning this war? Let's talk about the cost. 10,000 civilians and army people from the United States. They've died. Nearly 500,000 people. It depends which data you take from the newspapers. Nearly 500,000 Iraqis, 50,000 Afghans, 40,000 plus Pakistanis, and 7,000 Somali, and thousands in Libya and Syria. And what's the end result of all this cost which we have suffered? Human cost or financial support which we have given to these people. Pre-war, war on terror. There was only one terrorist group, Al-Qaeda. And they were not in Iraq, they were not in Syria, they were definitely not in Libya. And now, we have so many groups in Libya. 37 odd groups are working, terrorist group in Libya. And they have now connected themselves violence in the entire Arab region. And I'm sure Dr. Kamal can put more light on that as a matter of what's going on in Syria now. It is not us supporting ISIS. No Islamic country has supported ISIS. Where have they come from? This guy was in American prison, suddenly he's come out and he's a caliph. Unbelievable. Now we have Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda for the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, then Al-Qaeda Global, and then Al-Shabaab, and you name it. In every country where we have intervened to bring democracy, although we don't accept democracy when it comes in Egypt, nonetheless, this is how it is. That we have gone there with democracy, and what have we done? Look at Iraq and Afghanistan, in Syria and Libya, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, what is happening? It's in terrible state. Finally, a few minutes left. Lessons for us in the UK. I think we ought to have a very clear foreign policy. We are taking a lot of U-turns. Like Khalid Mahmood, very good friend of ours, MP, he said that Parliament did not pass that resolution. Americans were ready to throw some bombs on Sunday night, Mr. Lashari, if I remember correctly, had our Parliament passed the bill. So we need to have a very clear foreign policy. No financial or military support to these armed rebels. I think we have to be very careful who are we financially and militarily supporting. Otherwise, there will be other ISIS on our doorsteps. And don't forget, this is not something very simple. The young minds are being influenced everywhere, not only in the UK, everywhere in the world. And we suffer in the process. And why I'm saying this thing, I remember very clearly, like Mr. Lashari said, that we started counter-radicalization, de-radicalization program before 9/11. We could see young Muslims going from here to Pakistan, then to Afghanistan, and coming back. This triangular relationship was going very effectively. Agencies were aware of that, but ordinary public was not aware of that. We found out and we started working in countering radicalization. And when in 2002, we identified 15 people in writing to the authorities, in 2003 then, in writing, that these are the 15 people, they are trying to do something here. For example, one member of the group, he went to the next door friend, Jews. In Arabic, he writes, يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Kill and get killed in the path of Allah, in the path of God Almighty. So, when we reported these groups, there were many other incidents. When we reported them, for 2 years, police says, sorry, our hands are tied. Unless they commit something, we can't do anything. And those were the guys, on 21st of July, they committed these atrocities. Four of them. And they are in for 40 years now. So the Pakistanis and the Muslim community here, they have been actually leading the way. We need to engage with them meaningfully, not just for the media, that we are working with the Pakistani community, we are working with the Muslims. I don't think that is effectively happening, particularly in this government. I don't support any party, but in this particular government, that is not happening, unfortunately. And a clear exit strategy. We enter into Iraq and we just move out without a proper arrangements. Then in Afghanistan, now in Libya. What's happening in Libya? Where are we? The ordinary public is suffering. I always say what happened on the borders of Pakistan by the drone attacks. People got killed and the children who were left there, they were prepared as suicide bombers. Pakistan never saw that kind of menace of suicide bombing, but that had become norm. Now, thanks God, it has calmed down slightly, but it had become norm there. Every day, 1 or 2. We saw only 177 here. Pakistan was watching the 77 every other day there. The other very important point, we ought to have dialogue before we start using force. Unfortunately, we use force first and then we start dialogue. In 2006, we held an international conference, Dialogue Amongst Civilizations. And we begged the government that we need to have dialogue with Taliban. Instead of just going and killing innocent people. For one terrorist, hundreds of people are being killed. Why not start dialogue? At that time, nobody, took any serious note of that. But now everybody is begging us now, could we just enter into meaningful dialogue? So we need to have dialogue than using the force in advance. And then we need to look at the narratives and the counter-narratives. These people are terrorists. They are killing innocent people. No matter whatever they call them, the media ought to be very responsible. The government also ought to be very responsible. Instead of using Islam all the time, I think we ought to be using those groups with a different name. Now I have Islamic State. Where does Islamic State come from? If I say I have Islamic State somewhere, do you think that will become an Islamic State? So we ought to have a realistic approach by not demonizing Islam, knowingly or unknowingly, and demonizing the Muslim community. We are unfortunately isolating the Muslim community. And very unfortunately, what I see is Pakistan is not getting that effective support. Pakistan was abandoned, has been abandoned, and I think we living in the West, or the Republic, or the state institutions, wherever we have influence, we ought to support Pakistan in an effective manner by having economically and politically stable Pakistan. It goes in the favor of the Western countries, us living here. That is guarantee of peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taha Qureshi Sahab. I think Taha Qureshi Sahab has raised some very important questions. Who is financing these terrorists? Where from they are getting the weapons? And Pakistan, who has become the frontline state to fight terrorism, needs more capacity to deal with this. I think that is very important, and we will carry on discussing it. I've got two speakers who will speak less than 10 minutes each, and then I've got a contribution from Rana Nazir Shama, who is a Kashmiri activist living in London. Her grandfather was a long-standing activist of Kashmir cause. So can I invite Dr. Stephen O'Brien, who runs a London magazine, and it happened to be that it is in Kensington, Chelsea, Queen's Gate, which is near me. So we will meet again to discuss further. Can I invite you? And he is professor in Portsmouth University, Stephen O'Brien.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I speak really as a poet, a writer, a cultural journalist, and in so far as I can pass as an intellectual in literary and cultural terms. But post 9/11, I would say we are bewildered, and I'll talk about that word bewildered in a minute. I wish to plunder here the writings of Ted Hughes, Seamus Heaney, Carl Jung, and the journalist maybe Robert Fisk. But I won't be reading poetry, don't worry. Bewildered. Bewildered. Ted Hughes said that every word contains a goblin in it, and that this little goblin is its power. And if you look at the word bewilder and peer through the foliage into its derivation, we'll find be wilder, to be led into the wilds. We've been led into a wild place since 9/11. By whom and how is probably best for politicians to decide. And as I say, I'm a writer, a poet, and a cultural journalist. The task of writers and others in the cultural sphere is to explore this sense of bewilderment, bewilderment. In my view, there's not been enough of a journey into this being led into the wilds. Well, the end of the Cold War brought a sense of letting out of breath, a sense of, so much so that my daughters scarcely know what nuclear weapons are. And people of my generation knew of them almost from birth. And we lived under the shadow of annihilation. And we still do, of course, but we've forgotten about it. Culturally and intellectually, we struggle to make sense of this new affliction of terror. And literature and poetry and cultural dialogue is one of the ways in which we should talk to ourselves, about ourselves. And here are two short quotations to look at the power of words. An accuser: you would have killed me and my wife, and my babies. The responder, a terrible sickness requires a dangerous remedy. Here's another quotation for you. We must accustom ourselves to the thought of arms and the use of arms. We must make mistakes in the beginning, and we may shoot the wrong people. But bloodshed is a cleansing and a sanctifying thing, and the nation which regards it as the final horror has lost its manhood. There are many things more horrible than bloodshed. The first quotation is from Guy Fawkes, November the 5th, when he was brought before the king, and the king said, "You would have killed me and my wife and my babies, why did you do it?" And he said, "A terrible sickness requires a dangerous remedy." The second is 1913, from my country, from Ireland, Padraig Pearse, who led the Easter Rising. And he said, "Blood is a sanctifying thing." And in 2016, we celebrate in Ireland the centenary of the Easter Rising. And a man who said even we may shoot the wrong people has become enshrined as a glorious hero in the history of the Republic of Ireland. But those quotations are every bit as chilling as something that could come from ISIS. They're also mythic. And indeed, the poet Seamus Heaney, who died last year, after 9/11, he said, "We have entered a mythic time." There have been other mythic times, of course, in different places and times, and they usually come at the equinoxes of faith and injustice, where the two meet. And indeed, nations all tell themselves their own myths. The Battle of Britain has been given a gloriously mythic dressing up. The fall of the Bastille, the American War of Independence, has mythic qualities. Early 20th century Ireland became a mythic place. 17th century England became a mythic place. Carl Jung, the great father of psychology, said, "I cannot experience myself as a scientific problem. Myth is more individual and expresses life more precisely than does science. Science comes to a stop at the frontiers of logic, but myth does not. She thrives on ground as yet untrodden by theory." Now, this is either the greatest cop-out in history, or it is of deep gnomic significance. So, Seamus Heaney, who responded in prose and poetry, said of 9/11, "Acts of coldly premeditated terror, such as those of September the 11th, and the campaign in Iraq, these things have a quality of mirage about them. We experience them as a matter of course, partly as the undeniable facts of day-to-day life, but partly also as some kind of ominous foreboding, as if we were walking in step with ourselves in an immense theatre of dreams." Heaney was aptly poised to speak of terror. In Ireland, he experienced it and lived it both as a reality and in the mythic. "I grew up in an Irish family. I felt at once the outrage. I did feel the outrage of the atrocities of the IRA, but also a kind of pull, a lure for the glorious myth of the Irish rebel." Now, I wonder how many people who go to Syria feel that as, or maybe don't go to Syria, but somehow are attracted to it. What the poet Yeats, the Irish poet Yeats, expressed as, in the Irish heart, a terrible beauty, but also a fanatic heart. Words then are powerful, and Yeats said later of the Easter Rising, "Did I send those young men out to die?" And by that he meant, did his words make men go out and try and achieve independence for Ireland by, in the parlance of the time, sanctifying themselves in their own blood? We've seen the barbaric acts of the beheading of journalists, an awful pageantry of blood, and the executioner himself, who tries to sound epic and masterful. The figure is a spectre from medieval imagination, terrifying. An earlier incarnation of this man may have been the Jordanian Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who was killed in a missile attack in 2006. Now, Carl Jung would recognise this man as an archetype, as a shadow. Carl Jung called it the shadow, and I'll talk about the shadow in a minute. Al-Zarqawi was maybe more erudite than the man who was the executioner of those poor journalists. He called himself the Sheikh of the Slaughterers. He said the gates of paradise are under the shade of swords. He said, my nation, the nation of the sword and the pen. Why is it that your sword is now broken and your pen laid down? You used to be prouder than the stars, and now you've become downtrodden under the feet of the invaders and the hooves of the usurpers' horses. And this is heady stuff. It's rich with illusion of metaphor, reminding me of the old Irish song, what terrible shame and what lasting disgrace that our sons have been crushed by a vile foreign race, who have banished our priests and polluted our veins and turned to a desert, our fertile place. Of course, the vile foreign race being the English, of course. But people have died for these words, in both cases. They've killed and died for these words. And it's salutary, isn't it, in Irish culture, just as much as it was in Arabic culture. Words are prized above most things. Now, Robert Fish said of Al-Zarqawi, I don't know if he's a sort of invented creature. Now, quite apart from the fact that many Iraqis, along with, I have to admit myself, have grave doubts about whether he exists, and that Al-Qaeda Zarqawi, if he does exist, does not merit the title of insurgency mastermind. The point is that he exists in the mythic heart of people. Now, this is dangerous as well, because of course, well, if they say, I don't believe really that Al-Zarqawi doesn't exist, he's saying the myth of the man is more important, more powerful, more potent. Well, Carl Jung wrote about the shadow in this way. He says, and I think this is pertinent, once a band of strangers has been identified as threatening, the archetype of evil is automatically projected onto them, and they have to be destroyed. The projection is the justification of the act. Righteous ends are a justification of violent means, and hurriedly closing ranks in the divine thrill of the militant enthusiasm. Of course, Jung's shadow figure is a sword of two blades. Where Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, Mustafa al-Zarqawi, and the man who beheaded the journalists are our shadows. Yet just as surely, we are their shadows. With our decadence, historical and present brutalities, there have been thousands of dead in this so-called war on terror. And on the angry breath of each ranting zealot, maybe, there are tiny flecks of truth, for as we know, the West is far from unsullied. Humanity's darkest drop stones, those of extremism, suffering and hatred, spread ripples which inspire verse and the breeze of human consciousness. For instance, William Durand was written of the almost Homeric verse that comes from Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The very first work in the English language, the Epic of Beowulf, is about young men fighting. It is almost a need in many parts of the world throughout history for young men to fight. And it's all too easy for other men to give them an excuse to fight. In the light of this reality, I'm sure there's a literary imperative to respond to the epic and astounding fanaticisms which have risen everywhere in the opening years of this present century. And I have no answers or conclusions, other than the fact that we create our own shadows. We have created our enemies. We are bewildered, as if we've been led into a wild place. And as Seamus Heaney bears repetition, we live in mythic times.
Dr. O'Brien, thank you very much. I think you reminded Yeats and Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney, by the way, was a poet, Irish poet, who got Nobel Prize in 2006 or 8.
Yes.
Not far away from his poetry. Just Google him. Two men have been mentioned here. Gore Vidal, Google him. He was moved in 1960 into the President House of USA, White House. And after 6 months, he left it. He said, I don't want to live as a prisoner with John F. Kennedy. So Gore Vidal and Seamus Heaney and Yeats. I think, thank you very much. I think you brought in a different side of the world we live in. Because the poets, the writers, the culture writers are giving us the love, peace, and justice, which is our aim as well. Because you can't achieve peace without justice. And you cannot achieve justice without peace. So I think we live in a world which is very difficult to achieve these two things, but we are trying to achieve that. So I think it is a tough struggle, but we will carry on. Before I invite my last speaker, can I ask Rana Nazir Shama to come and say a few words? I know she has waited for long, but I wanted to represent women and men as well, as much as I can make the balance. Rana.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm going to probably give you some of my personal experiences. 9/11 was a terrible tragedy, not just for Americans, but for all of us. Nearly 3,000 Americans died, and since then 1 million Iraqis, Afghans, Syrians, Libyans, Pakistanis, and Kashmiris. The media has portrayed Muslims in a very negative light. And for many, this has caused a lot of issues. I mean, from verbal harassment to airport security checks. And has actually made me more aware and a lot closer to my faith, because I've seen people suffering firsthand. And it's actually made me more aware, closer to people, to find out, what's actually. And because I wear Western clothes, I don't get that sort of harassment. Or I've actually seen people, the ladies who wear hijabs, anybody with a beard, they've got verbal harassment. When I was working, in my work, you saw, at the time there was like the papers, it was all in the media, and there was a lot of, oh my God, Muslims, and they didn't realise I was actually Muslim. So I would sort of speak to them and engage with them and communicate. And I had to sort of work a lot more harder to actually convince people. And I realised, oh my God, this is such a big issue. And they really had this, not a hatred, but not much understanding of the issue. And until you communicate and you engage with people, that's the only way. And when now people see me and say, are you a Muslim? God, you're a great ambassador for your religion. So I know there's a lot of negative, but if we communicate and engage and build those bridges with people, and until we do that, we're going to continue to suffer. So at grassroots level, I advise people wherever they are to actually come together. And I'll give you another example. I went to drop my car in once into a garage, and I actually was wearing my own traditional dress. And as I went in, it was a weekend, and the guy looked at me, and I could feel, sort of, because I had my headscarf, and I felt that sort of on his face, and he did not want to deal with me, and you could feel that. However, I actually went back, and I actually not reported it, but I actually mentioned it to their customer service. Because if we don't take the issue and we brush it under the carpet and leave it, it's never going to get addressed. So what they actually did was, I spoke to them very sort of calmly, and I said, look, this is the issue, but we need to make people understand these things. And he actually went on a course, and I've actually met him again. I've taken my car back into that garage, and I get treated, just the same as everybody else, with a lot more pleasant. So it's about, sometimes we have to take that leadership as well to sort of get rid of the negativities, because a lot of people, if we don't communicate, we'll never know. If I give you a very simple example which I use, a cup of tea. If I made you a cup of tea, and every morning I'm making you a cup of tea, and I'm putting sugar in there and whatever, and you're saying, God, I don't drink, I don't take sugar, I'm a diabetic, I have coffee. Now, if I don't ask, or if you don't tell me, how am I going to know? So if I ask you the detail, well, how would you like your coffee? Do you like a little milk, more milk? That's the only way he's going to know. So if we don't speak up, or we don't communicate, we will not know what the difference is, and it's respecting those differences. So I'm not going to, I know, all the speakers I've heard, but today I thought I will give my personal view on it. So I say those criminals did not do it in my name. Looking at these issues in a more democratic way, like I spoke about, will work. And to encourage working together, building those bridges, and challenge extremism, because I've never ever really suffered racism because it's communicating with people and building those bridges. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is very important to listen to the personal experiences, and we have got friends from Ethiopia, and I know it has been said already that it is better the devil you know, and that's why they have been imposed a almost democratic dictatorship in Ethiopia. And Kefale will work on human rights issues in England with us. Can I invite my final speaker, and then I will ask you to comment as well. Dr. James King is sitting here, who has written a small booklet on 9/11, the Israeli links. You can talk to him as well, but I would like a few of you to say a few words before I invite Lord Kurban Said to conclude. But I know, I'm coming to you in a minute. So I wouldn't forget you otherwise. How can we forget an Iraqi living in United Kingdom and working with you for a long time? So can I invite Sabah Al-Mukhtar, who is the president of Lawyers, Arab Laws Association in United Kingdom. And we have worked for a very long time together. Sabah Al-Mukhtar. We are going to not go for very long.
But I was worried that I have to speak after Stephen with that elegant speech we had, but thanks to my sister, she gave me the break, so I can be a little more boring than his speech. I think we are talking on the occasion of 11 September, and there were 3,000 innocent people who died out of a criminal act. I don't think personal sorrows or national sorrows are for competition. No sorrow is more important than the other. And we can sympathize and empathize with the people, but the grief only hits the people who suffered it. Remembering that the losses of these 3,000 innocent people as a result of a terrorist attack in New York, that does not mean we shouldn't be looking at others who suffered as a result. 9/11 had nothing to do with Iraq. This was a Qaeda planned, so we're told, Saudi executed, but Iraq certainly had nothing to do with it. There were no Iraqis, there were no plans. As a result, for every American that was lost, we have 5,000 Iraqis who were killed by the Americans and by British soldiers. And I think this is totally unfair by any stretch of imagination. We've turned all the concepts upside down in respect of Iraq. So we talked about liberation, when you send an army to occupy another country, and we call it liberation. We wanted to have democracy by sending troops to occupy a country and bring in some agents and traitors to rule the country. We've talked about law and order, and we went with this lie for 10 years, since 2003. Since 2003, everybody knew it was an illegal act by any standard, including the Secretary General of the time, who remembered 18 months later that it was an illegal act. So I wonder whether he didn't know or he knew and didn't say. But anyway, it was an illegal act. We sent people there to create the mayhem of Abu Ghraib, which I think probably the picture of the guy who's standing with his hands is going to last, along with the pictures we've seen at Tiananmen Square, at Vietnam, the girl who was burnt. I think when one looks at the case of the 13-year-old girl, Amir Janabi, who was gang raped by the American soldiers. Then she was killed with her family. They were all burnt to death. And no one answered for that in the American justice. We have the situation where we've sent thousands of people from this country, not in defense of Queen and country. Soldiers in this country, they work for the defense of the realm and the Queen. They went to Iraq and they gave their life there because our friend, Mr. Tony Blair, and indeed, it's all very good we point at him, but he went to war with the support not of his party, but of the Conservative Party. That's probably one of the only wars that this country fought with the support of the opposition rather than the government, the party in the government. We had the media, which for 10 years talking about Saddam's army, Saddam's children, we were killing left, right, and center, but everybody somehow pretended that it was okay. And it was all a fictional black comedy situation. Then we end up by occupying the country. Probably many people are unaware that there are still a lot of soldiers who are on trial along with the Minister of Defense. We were told it's the bad apples. It's not everybody. Mentioning something about the discrimination during the 1991 campaign, the Foreign Office said something called Gulf Victim Support Unit, and I was asked to help with them, and I was meeting a lady whose son was in prison in Iraq. This was before the war campaign, and I was told by the Foreign Office, please don't tell her you are an Iraqi. So I was trying to, it's a long story, but her son is in prison because he did something wrong. He broke the law in Iraq. And I was trying to convince her that her son has nothing to do with the war. They will not kill him, they will not torture him. And she says to me, you don't know this Iraqis, you don't know this Iraqis. And I kept on trying to convince her about the law and about there is a difference between those who are fighting and those who are in prison. And she pushed me so much to do more that at the end of the day I forgot, I didn't pay attention. And I said to her, but I know them, they are not as bad as that. And I said to her, she said, no, you don't know the Iraqis. I said, yes, but I'm an Iraqi. She said, no, dear, you can't be, you're a nice guy. I have a friend of mine who was my colleague, he's a lawyer. He lives in Mosul today, and I phoned him to ask him how does it feel to live in ISIS land. And he thought that it was a sick joke, but anyway, he said to me, for the last 10 years, that's 2003 until now, every month he pays $50 protection money to Al-Qaeda, whatever their name is. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, whatever you call them. But for the last 10 years, listen to what I'm saying. Last 10 years, not 10 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. He's been paying $50 every month to the Qaeda people, because if he doesn't, something happens to him. And he was also paying another $50 to the police of Maliki, of the government, because if he doesn't, he'll get in trouble. He said, now with ISIS, I'm better off, I'm just paying ISIS. I said, I'm not paying Maliki. He said, in addition to that, he said, during the Maliki time, he said, every time I go out of my house, he said, I'm verbally insulted, abused. He said, I'm an old man, they make me stand for an hour in the sun to queue to check my identity. And they make me say all sorts of things about Sunnis and all that. He said, I was so insulted every time I go out. He said, I can tell you, since ISIS took over, I go out and they tell me, yes, Haji, go ahead, because I'm an old man. Nobody did. He said, I've not been insulted for the last 2 months. He said, I hate I was going to use the bad word. He said, I hate those guys. He said, but I don't want the others to go. I do not want the government to come back. Now, I think this situation has moved into a war between the Muslims and the West, and I think it's wrong. I took you through the 11th September because I was trying to come to the point that we have been dishonest. And I'm talking about the international community, about the United Nations, about the United Kingdom, about the USA. We've just been dishonest, totally dishonest. And we are repeating this thing exactly like now. I've listened to President Obama yesterday, and it was a fuzzy policy, full of rhetoric, talking absolute nonsense. He has no substance. Talking about getting an alliance with everybody, and you say, oh yes, and what are you going to do? The idea that you can fight terrorism from the air, you imagine you send F-16 to bomb 3 guys from Al-Qaeda who were sitting in one of these four-wheel drive, and you say you're fighting Qaeda on that. We talked about liberating Mosul Dam. I tell you, Mosul Dam is a huge thing. It's not even a bridge. It's a very huge structure. And ISIS occupied it in this way. They put 5 guys at one end with a black flag, and they put another 10 at the other end with a black flag. And that is the occupation. And it took NATO to liberate it. So we have liberated Mosul Dam. I don't know what they are trying to do, but at the end of the day, all those people in Iraq now, Daesh is, whatever the numbers is, 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 20,000. Those people cannot control all that sway of land. Those people can only be kicked out and sent out by the people there who are suffering from them. Our David Cameron tells us that we are suffering. Quite honestly, I'm not suffering here. I don't think anybody is suffering from ISIS. As such, there is a threat. Terrorism knows no boundaries, and we have to be careful. But the idea that somehow we try and tell everybody that ISIS is a threat to the national interest of the United Kingdom and USA, and you have a meeting at the Security Council which issues a resolution. I've asked one of the lawyers in the Security Council, I said, are you going to serve this resolution on the Khalifa Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, that you tell him that he's a bad guy? You know, because this is what we've done. We have a NATO meeting, we have a meeting in Jeddah, which is in Saudi Arabia, with everybody. But that is not the solution. The solution is there must be a recognition that the people in Iraq and in Syria are not ISIS. They are hostages of ISIS. And unless we treat those people not as ISIS, Bashar al-Assad is bombing the civilians, and the government in Baghdad, I was going to say Maliki, but let me just quickly go on that one. Everybody is talking about the change in the government of Iraq. This government is identical to what it was before. Maliki and this present Prime Minister, both of them are from Dawah Party. Dawah Party is an Iranian creation, financed, backed, and controlled. And those two were the most senior guys in the party. This one stepped down, this one stepped in. Everybody, all those people who are called Sunnis and all the rest of it, are just fiction. They are the same people who were there with Maliki for the last 10 years. But I think I will just say that we must be proud in Britain, because the President of Iraq is a British citizen. The Prime Minister of Iraq is a British citizen. 6 ministers are British citizens. Something like 20 senior politicians are British citizens, and probably something like 45 members of Parliament are British citizens. I think we're doing very well, but I think it is about time that we actually begin to really look at, for instance, who caused this. And I'm still waiting for the Chilcot inquiry to come out, because I bet that the Chilcot inquiry is going to contain sufficient information which enables somebody like the Crown Prosecution Service to begin some sort of a judicial inquiry as opposed to a public one. I think the problem of ISIS cannot be solved in the way that it's being done, as long as we continue to treat the hostages as the criminals and the bombing continuing on the cities of Iraq and Syria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabah Mukhtar. Before I call the chairman and vice chairman of all-party parliamentary group, any comment or question? Dr. James Tring, I know you want to say something.
Thank you very much.
So, yes, he has written a book, as I said. Carry on speaking to him, pick up a book. Yes.
Well, thank you. I was a planning and forecasting consultant, so I'm particularly keen to see some positive planning from 9/11 onwards to bring the Muslim and Christian, possibly even Jewish communities together, all world communities, building on the good things that have been done and trying to suppress the arms dealers and war lobbies. But we won't be able to do that unless everybody begins to realise that we've skirted round, in the Middle East anyway, possibly in the rest of the world, the central problem, which I see, and I've proven it I think in my book, is the imposition of the Zionist entity in the Middle East. In my view, it seems more than likely, given the inconsistencies that we've heard about, where at one time the Americans are supporting Al-Qaeda or Taliban, next time they're saying they're terrorists, same in Syria, the foreign secretary saying we're funding the rebels, next moment you're put in prison if you're one of them. So those sort of inconsistencies tell you something, don't they? That it's not the Americans or the British, because they keep changing their point, they don't really know what they're doing, because they're being told what to do by another agency. And that agency is well explained in books like the one by Mearsheimer and Walt about the Israeli lobby in America. There isn't an equivalent one here yet, unfortunately. The same thing is happening here, which shows us that the Israeli lobby has got a huge grip on, particularly on the American administration, through the neocon movement, which is explained by many authors to have been orchestrated by friends of Israel like Wolfowitz, Pearl, Douglas Faith, and others like that, who've got an agenda to push America, they actually more or less admit this, into wars for the benefit of Israel. In other words, what they did in their document, the rebuilding of America's defenses, it said there are 6 or 7 Muslim countries, they actually say, and they list them, which America will have to militarily occupy. You say quite why, but that's what, and they list them as Iran, Libya, Syria, Iraq, I'm not sure where Afghanistan is, Sudan and Yemen. And so we're halfway through that little program now. If we're going to do any planning, we've got to expose that plan, because it's evil. And it's all for one particular small group of people who've got their own interests at heart only. And they're prepared to expend British and American troops and money in order to serve their own ends, because they're frightened that those Muslim countries will come to the aid of the Palestinians, who we haven't really mentioned today, who are the real problem in the sense that they've been so cruelly treated by the Zionists for 60 or 70 years that the Israelis are frightened that somebody's going to come and reap justice for them eventually.
Thank you.
It might be Iran, it might be one of the Muslim countries. Let's hope we can get China and Russia on board, because it needs something fairly big to counter this movement. That's my plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your name and brief, please.
Yes, I'm Dr. Nick Colstrong. May I express the hope this all-party parliamentary group might be able to, 13 years on, allow the concept of Islamic innocence in relation to the perpetration of this great event of 9/11. A negative statement, Muslims did not do it. We all have different views on who did do it, and just his book. But surely it's not too hard for people to understand that people within the US military were involved in perpetrating this event, and the purpose of the event was to enable and facilitate these wars, Jane mentioned, and to give us this profoundly bogus concept of terrorists and terrorism, which this meeting's been about, putting innocent people in Guantanamo Bay and so on. Is it too frightening to go for what is widely called the truth movement? People who want to look at what really happened on the event 9/11. It's a deeply mysterious event, and I suggest that one could aim for quite a large consensus with the concept of Islamic innocence. Those about 19 hijackers, the Chinese, did not make the event happen. They were part of the story, they were really not the cause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We agree, and I think we will have another round table and we will form a committee. The email is here, it is TWS123. Email us and we will include you into our discussions and debates. Any other? Yes, Tawfiq. Dr. Shelley.
I want to ask how, as a group that's devoted to third world solidarity, we can address the problems, the biggest problems which threaten the planet, the increasing pressure on diminishing natural resources, climate change, which has the potential to make most of the world uninhabitable, beset with corruption, which seems to be a problem in every country. Human beings are naturally aggressive. It's our aggression that's made us what we are. And then now we are talking about people destroying each other when the things that threaten to destroy us are out there. We all need to work together to address them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tawfiq, Dr. Shelley. I think he's an environmentalist, so I think it is very important to look into the issues. And I think today's floods, tomorrow winter will be very harsh in the United Kingdom, so we know why it is happening. So yes, carry on. Any other? Yes, Umar Mahmood. He's from FOIR, Forum for International Relations and Development. Yes.
Thank you. Just a quick question to the panel, really.
I will not allow them to answer, but you can ask a question. Carry on debate.
Really, the question is, we've already talked about those people who are being radicalized and then they're heading over to Syria. People are going from here to help IDF. Perhaps later on we can discuss what are the ways to stop that from happening. How do we stop the radicalization? And once those people come back, rather than stopping them from coming, how do we de-radicalize them? And we have a member of the House of Lords here, so perhaps the House of Lords, have discussed this in some sort of detail as how we stop that from happening. Because we recently heard from Scotland, who's going through the referendum at the moment as well, that a girl aged 20, going to a private school, a well-off family, well-to-do, going over to Syria to join ISIS. She's not a fundamentalist. She's not going to a madrasa. She's not, from any Islamic institution. So it's really how do we counter that and how do we de-radicalize those people that intend to come back.
Thank you, Marwa. I think with the help of FIR, we will organize a roundtable meeting, 20, 25, 30 people, to discuss it and then present a paper to the people in different positions in the government of United Kingdom very soon. And as you said, Lard Hussain is from a party which is in the government coalition, so we can raise these things through him. Any other?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I've spent my life with
Rizwana,
my name is Rizwana
Shelley,
and I spent my life with the age group of 11 to 19. And what I've found is that if they are happy and looking for jobs or working in jobs, then there is less chance of them sort of going off the rails. If you're so busy enjoying the bit of money you earn at the end of the week, but when I see every day my friends' children saying, he's a graduate, he's a master, he's this, he's that, and they're not working. Now that is going to set your mind up some way. And that is, I feel that if we can, I don't know, the House of Lords, there's some sort of, even if it is a voluntary army, I know the government is on volunteers and so on, but to be a volunteer, you have to get yourself there. I'm talking about the young people. I'm a worker. I've been working since I was 15. I was 15 on Wednesday and I started work on Saturday in Woodwards. So that's coming, but again, volunteers are fine. How can you volunteer 5 miles away if you haven't got the money to go and volunteer there? So you want to engage the young, do it some way that they can not be radicalized by working and helping out.
I think we already said it, and these are your words, and I will say it, we have many times. Give a young person a job and a house, and he will never be a terrorist, I can assure you. So yes, possibly, once you give him a job and a house, he will marry and produce good children for us, a nation. Any other comment? Thank you very much. I know we will carry on discussing it around once the meeting is finished. Yeah, you have to, I know 8 o'clock, but if you can stay for 3-4 minutes, Lord Hussain will speak and he will conclude. Lord Hussain, Vice Chairman of All Party Parliamentary Group. Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to you all. 9/11, a huge tragedy that took innocent lives, 3,000 plus. And who was exactly responsible for it? Well, we hear from the press or from the statements of the governments that some Muslims were responsible for it. But we haven't got the truth yet, exactly who was responsible for it. I know who has paid the price for it, but we don't know whether they were responsible for it or not. Certainly Iran was not responsible for it, and the other countries, neither was Libya responsible for it, or for that matter, other countries that we have seen in trouble since then. I have to say that prior to 9/11, particularly from 79 till 89, America, as has been said already, and I'm not going to repeat, half of my speech was half of Mr. Twaquaresh's speech. I had similar things in mind, and in fact, if you look in the Google, you will find that I have used the same arguments from the floor of the House in various debates when talking about peace and stability in that region. And what you said was exactly right. But during those years, America moved so close in many areas to the Muslim world. And when America came out, I think it was still a friend of the Muslims in many areas. Although if you talk about Palestine and whatever, people have a different view, where America has put itself throughout the history of Israel. However, when the 9/11 happened, even then I think throughout the Muslim world, people were sympathetic to American citizens who had lost their lives. No Muslims were, showing that they were ever, pleased to hear that or whatever. They were all, mourning that innocent lives have been lost. What America could have done at the end of 1979 and even after the 9/11, particularly I would say from 1989 when they withdrew from Afghanistan, all the Mujahideen were friends of CIA. They could have been easily demilitarized, radicalized if the CIA puts its efforts into it. It was much easier then because they were friends. And then the way America responded after 9/11 to Afghanistan and how it treated people in Afghanistan and in Iraq. By the way, some of you would know that I left the Labour Party on the day that Iraq war began, and I joined the Liberal Democrats on that. So, if you ask the ordinary Afghanis, they will tell you that even the Taliban time was much better than what they saw since 9/11. If you look at Yvonne Ridley, who was in captivity of the Taliban, and compare that with Dr. Afia Siddiqui, who is in captivity of the CIA, it tells you a very clear story. Why should the Muslims be more friendly towards America, or why they are not? I think what we need to see is what are the basis of radicalization and extremism and anti-Western, anti-American sentiments in the Muslim world. Britain, if it didn't follow Americans blindly, is much more respected in many Muslim countries. But in the recent past, we've shown that we followed Americans blindly, and we get blamed as much as America gets blamed for many things that they've done wrong in the world. But if Britain, even now, stands up and deal with one issue, and that is the double standards that the West has adopted internationally. I was born in Kashmir. If you look at the Kashmir issue, all they're asking for is what we are prepared to give to Scotland is a right to vote about their future. Nothing more. Both India and Pakistan have signed up to it in the United Nations. All Britain needs to do is get them to implement the UN resolutions that, yes, let's have a referendum. What do the Kashmiris want? And what is happening when you deny people's right, when you push them against the wall, when you have army given with special powers, and those of you who are not aware, under the Indian Constitution, there is a clause which gives the armed forces special powers. And Indian Army is deployed in various troublesome areas in the last 60 years to deal with uprising or whatever with those rights. And under those, it is called Armed Forces Special Power Act. Anything that the army does cannot be challenged in any court of law if the army is sent to a particular area under those conditions or those laws. And it has gone to Punjab for a short time and came out. It went to Nagaland for a short time and came out. But you know, although Indian Army is in Kashmir since 1947, but from since 1991, they have been sent with Special Powers Act. And you read the mass rapes, you know, in that area by the Indian forces, mass graves that exist in that area, and people who are caught from their own houses. If you read the latest, well, this is about 3 years old now, the Amnesty International's report called The Lawless Law, you will find, it's that booklet, you will find case by case atrocities committed by the armed forces. Why is the army there with those brutal kind of powers? And it misuses its power as well as using those powers. Just because people want their right. Why is Britain scared of asking the Indian government to allow people to have their right to live according to their own ways? If we don't have these double standards in the world, I think we will have most of the radicalization. We could get rid of that. Be it Palestine, Kashmir or other areas. If we can have the same right given to the people of East Timor, if we can have the same right being given to the people of South Sudan, why can't we give that right to Kashmir? And at least you will have one of the largest or oldest disputed issue since 1947 on the agenda of the United Nations resolved. And what I say is, as soon as we get rid of these double standards and the things which are already being said, that you support extremists in one area and then you become their enemies as soon as they've finished the job. And therefore, I think we need to change these policies. Whether people are unemployed or they are holding degrees and in excellent jobs, you've seen doctors who have been radicalized. It's not that they're out of work. It is the injustices which are making them radicalized. It is the double standards of the world which are radicalizing the young people. And we need to look at the reasons of these radicalizations and deal with them. And thank you very much for being here today.
I really thank you, because there are people who have sat for almost 2 hours, quarter to 2 hours listening. So a big hand for yourself, but also thank you to all speakers. I think I have more information this evening than I had when I entered this room. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe journey. Thank you. Why not?